Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this, my last lecture. It's actually being filmed in Carrick Theater, and as you can see behind me is Hagen Auditorium, all empty, of course. First, I want to congratulate all of you on this momentous occasion. I'm not sure how I was chosen to give this last lecture because I really thought my last lecture was going to be last December when I finished my classes. However, I can say with confidence that this will be my last lecture. And although I've taught accounting at Transy for the past 40 years, I know you're going to breathe a sigh of relief to know that I'm only going to lecture you on a few things related to accounting. And what I'm going to talk about is not necessarily something we would cover in class, but it is something that I would expect all of my students to know. The one thing that all of us have in common is that we all must file income taxes. Even though most of you will have a CPA do your taxes, you still need to be aware of what is on that tax return. I've been a CPA for longer than I've been teaching at Transy, and I have lots of friends and acquaintances who are CPAs, and I can assure you that they are all qualified, capable, trustworthy, competent, and thoroughly prepared to prepare your return. But you should never depend solely on them. You have every right to know what is on that return and to question anything on that return that you would like to question. It is ultimately your responsibility, whatever is on that tax return, so you need to always remember that. In fact, most CPAs are going to have you sign a letter, commonly called an engagement letter, where you sign acknowledging your responsibility for that tax return. There's also a common misunderstanding about filing for an extension. Remember that an extension is just that, an extension to file. It is not an extension to pay. Believe it or not, most people actually think that when they file an extension, it gives them additional time to pay. But anytime you file your taxes after the due date, if you owe money, you may be subject to penalty and interest. Also, sometime in your life, you're going to have to prepare a personal financial statement. If you're going to apply for any type of credit or something like that, and on a personal level, we usually call that a net worth statement. And what is included on that net worth statement are the things that you own, your assets, the debts that you owe, your liabilities, and the difference is your net worth. I'm not really going to lecture you on preparing a financial statement, but I think that you might find it interesting to go through that process just to calculate what your net worth might be. Another thing I hope that all of you will do is that you will learn to balance your checkbook on a regular basis and that you will track the money that you spend. There's some good apps now that you can download that will help you track all of your spending. And if you're going to use credit cards, you should pay those credit cards off monthly. If you do not do that, you're overspending. And I hope that all of you will develop a budget. Make sure, though, that that budget is reasonable and one that you can and will follow. The last suggestion I'm going to make before I talk briefly about the CARES Act is to suggest that you establish and regularly contribute to a Roth IRA. A Roth IRA allows your earnings to grow tax-free, so that when you take those out, they will never be taxable to you. The disadvantage of a Roth IRA is that you do not receive any immediate tax savings from investing in a Roth. But I do believe that the advantages of a Roth IRA far outweigh any disadvantages. Now I'm going to talk to you briefly about the CARES Act that was recently passed by Congress. It offers some benefits and relief that could be relevant to you if you have federal student loans. And if you have federal student loans, you are not required to begin making those payments on those loans for 6 months after you graduate. That's called the deferral period. But if you have the type of loan that accrues interest during this time, during this 6-month deferral period, any payments that you make will go directly to principal. So that's really different than what it's been in the past. And that only happens until the end of September. But if you have the type of loan that doesn't accrue interest during this 6-month deferral period, the CARES Act really doesn't offer a benefit to you. One other thing you need to consider is whether or not your employer offers a benefit where they will assist you with payments on your student loans. If they do that, that benefit would normally be a taxable benefit. However, between now and the end of the year, any assistance that they may give you is going to be tax-free to you. And remember, if you're in negotiations with a potential employer, you may want to try to negotiate that as part of your benefits package. And whether you have this benefit or not, it may be worth having a conversation with your employer and exploring the possibilities. I know that none of you expected your semester to look like this. I never thought that social distancing and wearing a mask would be something that would become part of our normal life. But for now, however, this seems to be our new normal. It happened so suddenly that we had no time to prepare. But in reality, how could we have prepared? I don't think anyone would have ever imagined that our country would close down and that we would be required to go into, I'm calling it, family confinement. We just never could have imagined that something like this would happen. And it's been challenging and difficult for everyone. And as students, I know how much you may have complained about going to class in the past and wishing that you didn't have to go to class. But I think, had you known this was going to happen, that you would have chosen going to class. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being at home with your parents and siblings, but I just bet you would choose going to class. So the next time you wish for something, remember, be careful of what you wish for because you may just get it. Seriously though, I hope that you've had time to spend quality time with your family and that you've been able to do things that you might not otherwise have been able to do. I know that many people are suffering and hurting right now because they've lost their life as they knew it. Hopefully, the people and the companies who really need the help are the ones receiving the help. The country is spending money that it really doesn't have, so we need to act responsibly in doing that. And some of the people right now who are receiving unemployment are receiving twice what they would make when they work. That's great, but it does make it hard to convince them to come back to work. Getting free money or free stuff is great, but please understand that nothing is ever really free. Although it may be free to you now, you will be the one paying for someone else's free stuff in the future. The government operates off taxes, so it's all going to have to be paid back, and you all are going to be the ones that get to repay that with your taxes. I'm going to talk briefly about where I have been with my life and some of the lessons I have learned along the way. I grew up in eastern Kentucky at a time when having a TV was a luxury that only the very rich enjoyed. I could never have imagined the possibility of having a cell phone or access to the internet, or even what those things were. In fact, as a very young child, we did not have indoor plumbing. Our water had to be brought in from the outside, either from a spring or from a pump. The bathroom was called an outhouse, and I had to take baths in a tub. Now, I didn't say a bathtub. Truly, it was a tub, a round metal tub. My mom carried the water in from the outside in a bucket, heated it on a wood-burning stove, and at that time, we didn't own an automobile. We had to walk everywhere. So I guess we were in much better shape back then. But I honestly do not know if we were that poor or if that was just the way it was, because that was all that was available. I would say it was probably a combination of both of those things. At the age of 9, we moved to Covington in northern Kentucky, and everything was different. Let me see now. We had TVs, we actually had 2, running water, and bathrooms that were inside the house. And heck, we even had a telephone and a car. Boy, I really thought I was something then. We moved to Covington during the middle of my 5th grade year after the death of my father. And upon arrival at my new school, I was tested for placement in various classes. And the thing I remember most about all of that is that I was placed in an 8th grade reading class. I was in the 5th grade, but I was placed in an 8th grade reading class. And I was in no way prepared for that. I hadn't been out of where I grew up before I came to Covington, so I had not been exposed to much of anything. My mother tried unsuccessfully to have me moved to a lower class. Well, an easier class, I guess. But that never happened because I had to stay in the class that I had tested into. That was a traumatic year for me. Losing my father, moving to a new town, going to a new school, and doing something I had never done, doing poorly in class. I should not say this as a college professor, but I can promise you that I made sure I was not that smart the next time I took that reading test for the following year, which would have been my 6th grade year. The move to Covington was part of my mother's plan to make sure that I got an education so that I could have a better life. My mother only went to the 4th grade, and none of my siblings graduated from college or even went to college. And I'm not sure they graduated from high school. I think they did, but I'm not positive about that. She had to raise my sister and 3 brothers on her own after their father was killed in a mining accident. My sister, who was the oldest, was 7 at the time. My mother was older when she married my father, but she ended up having to raise me on her own as well. My mom was a very smart, kind, and gentle lady, but I also know that she was strong, independent, stubborn, shrewd, and savvy if she needed to be. When I was younger, communication is not what it is today. We had to get our news either from the TV or from the radio. And since I didn't have a TV until I was older, this came from the radio. There were no cable TV stations back then. So the news that I remember from those years are things that really were big things that happened. One of those things was the assassination of President Kennedy. I remember as a young child, the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong, who actually walked on the moon. The Berlin Wall came down. And of course, during all of this, the Vietnam War was going on. It started when I was 6 years old, and it lasted for 20 years. So anytime something big didn't happen, the Vietnam War was being covered. But I have to say that I really preferred the news back then because I thought it was really news. Now it just seems that the news has some political undertones, regardless of what it's about. But back then, we didn't have access to all the things that we have access to now. We didn't have the internet. We couldn't pull up our phones and see what was happening around the world. After graduating from high school, I was fortunate enough to be able to travel for a year with a musical show by the name of Up With People. It gave me the opportunity of a lifetime. I'd never really been anywhere. I went to places I would have never gotten to go and see things I would have never gotten to see. We traveled from place to place on big buses. I think now we call those big buses motor coaches, but they were no motor coaches. They were just buses, very plain. I was 17 when I left home, and I had never been away from home before. I did not have a cell phone, and I could not Skype or talk to my mother via the internet. If I wanted to talk to my mother, I had to use this thing called a payphone. So a payphone required you to put money in, and you would get to talk for a few minutes. And I can't remember how you knew when your time was up, but you knew that if you didn't, there might have been a sound or something. If you didn't put more money in, you were going to get cut off. Needless to say, I couldn't afford to call home much. We communicated through letters. When was the last time you all wrote a letter? Anyway, we performed all over the United States and in Italy, Switzerland, and Monaco. We performed at Carnegie Hall in New York. We performed for Prince Rainier and Princess Grace in Monaco. We had an audience with Pope Paul VI at the Vatican. We performed in Beverly Hills for the famous actors and actresses at that time. And one of the things I remember most about one of our performances was in 1968, we performed at the Democratic Convention in Chicago. And they were having a lot of riots, and they were under a strict curfew. The streets of Chicago were lined with National Guardsmen, and we had to be escorted into the convention. It was frightful to see the streets deserted, much like it has been lately, except there were National Guardsmen there who were carrying guns. While in Europe, we traveled by bus as well. And back then, there was no European Union. So when we traveled from country to country, we always had to stop. And we would have armed guards entering our bus to check our passport. It was a little bit disconcerting I guess I was 18 at the time. But that year was a wonderful year, and I would not trade those experiences for anything. After traveling that year, I was off to college and then on to my professional career. I worked in public accounting for a year and a half, and it was at that time that I applied for my first credit card. Of course, I was turned down. The reason given, I was female. The managing partner of the firm I worked for had to intervene on my behalf because I traveled all the time and I had to have a credit card. After that, I was offered a job with a manufacturing firm where I worked for 3.5 years. Then I accepted a position at EKU for a year, and the following year I came to Transylvania, which is where I've been ever since. I've loved every moment of my time here. Well, maybe not every moment, but certainly most of them. I was 30 when I started teaching, and I assumed I would always be young. I remember the first time I had the child of one of my former students in my class. It was an oh my gosh moment for me because I suddenly realized maybe I'm just not that young anymore. But I think what would be even more scary for me is if I started having grandchildren of my former students in my class. Had to leave before that happened. I was fortunate to have not only an amazing mother, but an amazing mother-in-law as well. I get my strength, my determination, and my work ethic from my mother. But my mother-in-law taught me to be patient. And I know that some of you who know me are thinking right now, she doesn't have any patience. All I'm trying to say is that if I did have patience, I would have gotten that from my mother-in-law. Looking back on my life, I think those two wonderful people probably had the most influence on me. To all of you, I hope that you will all appreciate and embrace who you are. Always be true to yourself and be thankful for what you have. And whenever you can, do a random act of kindness for someone. Have goals and be responsible. I know that we all want what we want now. Be very careful of that you don't get yourself into some kind of financial trouble. I hope that all of you will try to live your life as debt-free as you possibly can. And that may not mean much to you now, but wait until you start having a family and become responsible for other people and their well-being. You're going to face obstacles and challenges, and how you overcome those things will help you grow and learn about yourself. There will be times where you will be unsure and afraid. If you cannot overcome your fear, you may just have to do it afraid. I bet the first time you drove a car you were afraid, right? And if you had not driven that car the first time, guess what you would be doing? Walking. I've always tried to live my life to the fullest and look at things in a positive way, even the bad things. Try to find something positive in everything. I lost one of my beloved pets last week, my dog. And I'm still working on where that positive is there, but I know that I will find it somewhere. And I feel so fortunate to have had a career that I truly love and one that I had a passion for. One of the things I tell myself, and I tell it to other people as well, is that the more you do, the more you do. When we get older, we tend to try to slow down, and that slowdown just increases until we almost stop. But my motto is that if you keep on moving, you can't get caught. No one's going to catch you. And I prefer the busiest version of myself. My friends tell me all the time to stop and smell the roses. My response, I do not need to stop to smell roses. I can smell those roses as I pass by. Although this semester has been challenging and was not the semester you pictured it to be, you persevered and you made it. Choose to be happy and stay positive. Thanks so much for allowing me to do this.